Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 280. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about lakeside walks, quaint villages, and romantic poets as we go to England's Lake District.
Got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have three news stories for you. The first one is that Starwood Hotels and Foursquare are getting together so that when you check in using Foursquare, the location-based app on your iPhone or Android phone, then you may get a chance to get extra Starwood points for the hotel that you're staying at. And then there's been a rash of weird behavior on flights this week, and I don't know what that is all about. Probably the most scary story was from the Daily Mail. Someone who got very nervous at about 35,000 feet about being in an airplane. A British man believed to be in his 40s worried fellow passengers when he became agitated during the short trip from Krakow, Poland to Edinburgh. He began pacing up and down the aisles while clutching onto a card of safety instructions which detailed how to open the exit during an emergency situation. The man finally put on his russock and lunged at the door handle, but was quickly tackled by staff and fellow passengers as the aircraft's pilots were forced to land at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport. And this is one of at least three stories in the same week of people just suddenly getting terribly claustrophobic or something during airplanes. I suspect it's because they didn't have flight attendants like the one that Justin Bieber ran into, who runs a tight ship. There's a Qantas flight attendant. It seems that Bieber and his security guards got up during their seats while the plane was taxiing, and the flight attendant told Bieber that his behavior was a security risk and that everyone knows you should be seated before takeoff, and that if he was going to act like a child, he would be treated like a child. That's a flight attendant who won't take no guff. For links to all of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Zoë Dawes, who is a travel writer and come to talk to us about the Lake District in England. Zoe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to talk to you.
And I should say that you are the Quirky Traveler at quirkytraveler.com. And I feel like I should welcome you back to the show because it will come up at some point in this interview. But we're doing this again, and we're doing this because of a technical problem on this end. As they say, between the chair and the keyboard, we had shortcomings. So thank you so much for your patience. Where is the Lake District? When we talk about that, where are we talking about?
The Lake District is in the county of Cumbria, which is on the left-hand side of England on the west coast. And it's the last county before you hit Scotland. So if you're thinking in terms of the cities, the biggest city nearest to us is Manchester. It's just about an hour and a half's drive from Manchester.
And yet it seems like, from what I understand of the Lake District, and of course I know a little more about it than I did a week or so ago, that we're talking about an hour and a half drive away, but a world apart from the industrial area in Manchester.
Absolutely. Beautifully put. It really is. It's sort of world apart, actually, from so many places in England. And yeah, it's a great escape from the city life because it is a very country part of England.
Okay. And why should I go to the Lake District? Why should I plan my trip to England to allow time to visit what's a little bit out of the way?
Yes. Well, in a way, that's one of the appeals for people who do come to visit it, because although you do need that bit of extra effort, it's so well worth it, Chris, when you get here. It's a relatively small area. It's probably, I think, from top to bottom, it's no more than 60, 65 miles from the south of the county to the north. East to west, probably about 40 to 50. But it is a very, very diverse area. We have what we call mountains, which for you guys would be little pinpricks, but they're small and perfectly formed mountains, very quaint villages. It's a farming community area, a lot of history, a lot of literary, artistic connections. So there's a kind of microcosm of what England is, but you feel a little bit as if you're stepping back in time as well.
And my impression is we're not talking about an area that has been popular with tourists forever in England. It's not like this goes back to some place that King Arthur used to take his summers.
No, absolutely not. Although we do have a lot of stone circles, some of which are supposed to have connections.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Back that time. No, it was actually considered a place of brigands and robbers up until, well, really, it was poets like William Wordsworth and his group of Romantic poets that started to popularize it as a place for visitors to come and appreciate the natural beauty. Up until his time, I think people just thought it was a very scary place where there'd be brigands who would attack you, which of course wasn't true, but it wasn't much visited by tourists up until 200 years ago.
And I'm curious, when I think of English people now, I think of people who have a great love for hiking and the outdoors and the laws in England that say you can basically walk anywhere and the great open paths and things like that. Is that something that only goes back to the Romantic period, or are we talking about a significant change in England as a people?
That's a really interesting question. I think the love of walking for itself, for people to come and visit this area, is probably even just over 100 years. Wordsworth and his crowd would wander, lonely or not, because that was really the only way that they could get around. It was either on horseback or carriages, whatever. But the tourists who came would only do short trips on foot. The real walking, hiking thing came about very much in the last century, and particularly in the Lake District, I'd say, from about the turn of the sort of 19th century. Now it's extremely popular.
Okay. And so this is an area that to get there, we're probably going to take a flight or a train from London to Manchester and then rent a car, I assume, or take public transportation. Which works best to get to the Lake District?
It's really good to have a car to get around up here. It's easy to get from London by train to the edge of the Lake District. You can get up to Kendal in about 2.5 hours from London by train. But then it starts to get a little more difficult. Trains into the Lake District are few, and then public transport's not that great. So my advice to people generally would be, fly up to Manchester. It's less than an hour's flight. And then a hire car from there right the way through into wherever you want to go. And then you've got the freedom to walk, use public transport, or obviously use your car.
Okay. And then if I'm in the Lake District, what kind of an itinerary would you recommend?
Well, the great thing is, because it's very compact, you can actually see an awful lot of the heart of the Lake District in just a day or two. I mean, I often take people out and give them a flavour of it just in one day. And the things to do if you're only here for a short time are to focus on 3 or 4 of the big lakes, again, all relative, but big for England, such as Windermere, Derwent Water, Coniston, Ullswater, and to go to 2 or 3 of the very quaint villages, which are like Grasmere and Hawkshead. And possibly, if you can, definitely stay, a couple of nights. And if you want to do the South Lakes, a very popular place for tourists and walkers is around Ambleside. And for the North Lakes, again, very popular, is up in the town of Keswick. Both those centres would give you access to the whole area within the day.
And Ambleside, which I just love the name of, sounds like that one of the things I'm going to do is just amble along the side of the lakes.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a great place for, if you're a serious walker, then, we've got the hiking up the mountains and some quite challenging climbs. But absolutely, if you want to amble, then this is a good place to do it.
Okay. And so I think of this as a picturesque area. So I'm bringing my camera, I'm doing some walking, I'm getting in the outdoors. In the villages, besides the pubs or the tea houses, are there things that I should especially make sure to look out for, either historic or notable?
Certainly, there is a huge industry around 2 of the most famous authors, one of whom was sort of born and brought up in Cumbria, and that's William Wordsworth, who lived here all his life, really, apart from a brief spell when he went to fight in the French Revolution. And also he was in London studying. So places like Hawkshead and Grasmere, where he went to school, where he was buried, and the houses where he lived, beautiful. And of course, the other one, who I'm not sure, Chris, if she's so popular in the States, but Beatrix Potter, who wrote children's books with animal characters like Peter Rabbit.
Well, I certainly grew up with Beatrix Potter and her stories.
Oh, okay. Well, it's perfect for that because she used to come here on holidays. And so there's loads of places where if you look in the books, you can recognize from the books. And she did eventually move up here and married a local solicitor. And her house, which is called Hilltop, is one of the most visited houses in Britain, actually. It's very, very popular. So those would be, I'd say, the sort of literary connections, but also they're just very quaint with little nooks and crannies, which people really like. It's all higgledy-piggledy, and the little villages are they've just evolved. And, I think it was more where the sheep wandered rather than any planning of man. So you can't really get lost on the level in the Lake District. You can very easily get lost if you go up on the fells, if you're not careful with your maps, etc. But I say just wandering about and sort of following curiosity will take you to lots of places.
Well, and I think we were mentioning Beatrix Potter. Of course, a movie just came out in the U.S., came out elsewhere as well, but that I think reintroduced her to some people who may have forgotten of her, if people had. And so that also showed some wonderful shots of the Lake District as it talked about her moving up to that area. But
yeah, I think it was with Renée Zellweger, wasn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
What was great was apparently, for the sake of filming access to London, they'd wanted to film in Wales, which was a little bit nearer. And fortunately, it was persuaded that they make that big trek 2 hours further north and actually film it in the Lake District. And yeah, it shows this area to its absolute best.
So it was talking quite a lot about her love for the area, and they nearly filmed it someplace else. Well, that
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
That might have caused some controversy, I imagine.
I think it would.
What is going to surprise me when I go to the Lake District?
I think it is the diversity, Chris. It's the fact that within a half an hour, you can be going from lushly wooded valleys with a small river sort of babbling through it to quite barren mountainsides with Roman forts at the top. And then you can go down to the coast, got coastal views over the Irish Sea. Got the Pennines on the west, you've got the Scottish borders. It is hugely diverse, and that's the thing that seems to strike people. And also what people love are the stone walls everywhere. I often take American tourists around and they seem to absolutely love the fact that we don't have hedges or wooden fences. Our fields and mountainsides are covered with traditional stone walls. So that's very appealing.
The Roman forts. And last time you and I talked, when we did this show the first time, I didn't have a map up of where the Lake District fell in England, so I didn't realize just quite how far north it is and how close it is, for instance, to Hadrian's Wall.
Absolutely.
Which, of course, is another classic hiking area now in England, and one that's on my list to hike that width of England at the narrowest spot there along Hadrian's Wall that kept those Scots out of England there.
Yeah.
Or the Picts, I think, actually. But
and the Scots would probably say, keep the English out of Scotland. Well, it's a lovely walk to do, Chris, because you're going across two of England's sort of wildest counties, and people are still surprised that there is some wildness here. And certainly, we had the Romans coming over. This was the furthest north that they got. And in fact, the highest, I think it's the highest hill fort, is at Hard Knot Pass. And really just, it's so out of the way. And you can just imagine legions of poor Italian soldiers thinking, what on earth are we doing here? And then the wall itself either starts or finishes, depending on which way you look at it, in the very north of Cumbria, and very unspoiled there. It's a really lovely walk to do, actually.
It's not quite the furthest north. They actually have built a wall north of Hadrian's Wall, and the Antonine Wall, built in I'm looking at the 142 AD, and that was built near the Firth of Forth.
That's right, yes, absolutely. And I have been to that. Well, I've been to parts of it because a friend of mine lives nearby. And I must admit, we have perhaps pictures of the Great Wall of China or something. And the Hadrian's Wall there's a few little forts and bits of stone left to look at. Antonine's Wall tends to be a lot more of a kind of grassy mound. But yes, and then I think they really had enough. And the Scots did a jolly good job of telling them to go back home.
Right. Excellent. So when is a good place to visit? We're talking England, so weather is something to be aware of. You have it.
We have it in abundance here. I think the biggest warning for anybody coming is we have the lakes because we have the rain. The highest rainfall in England is in the Lake District. So being prepared for that is certainly important. But best times to visit, I would definitely say, is either springtime, mid-April through to sort of the end of May is absolutely glorious. If you're here in the sort of early to mid-April, we've got the daffodils that Wordsworth wrote about and the lot of spring green. And then you go into lovely rhododendrons and azaleas and full-on spring blossom colour. And then the other time, which a lot of people love, is the early autumn, October time. We often get some of our loveliest weather then. And of course, because we have these deciduous trees like you do, particularly on the East Coast in America, so the colours are lovely too. The time I would say to avoid, unless you have no choice, would be August, because the places, certainly the popular places, are heaving. And so I'd say spring and autumn. Winter can be lovely. Again, the clarity of the light, especially if you like photography. But we can't guarantee the weather any time of year.
So bring an umbrella, bring a Macintosh. I always love the English saying that there is no bad weather, only inappropriate clothing.
Absolutely. It's definitely very appropriate here.
If it's raining so hard that I just don't feel like going outside, this is, of course, a largely outdoor area, or at least to enjoy it, where would I go?
again, depending on your interests. We have stately homes. We even have a couple of castles. So there's places like Sizer Castle, which I think has got a peel tower there that's in the South Lakes that sort of goes back to about the 12th century and has been lived in by the same family up to today. We've got, as I say, 4 or 5 castles and largish houses dotted around. So if you like those, that's it. Obviously, there's the Wordsworth, Beatrix Potter kind of places. We have a big visitors centre halfway up the county on the main motorway that goes to the east of the Lake District itself. And there's a centre there called Reg Ed, which has a lot of the history of the area and also some shopping opportunities. A lot of people choose to actually go into the 2 or 3 biggish towns we've got, which are Carlisle, Kendal, Barrow, and do a bit of shopping. And then there's a few museums. The Pencil Museum, if pencils are your thing, Chris. Because the pencils were the graphite.
Oh, sure. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Was mined here. Yeah.
Only if I could see something besides a number 2 pencil, really.
I think we've got the biggest pencil in the world, supposedly, in there. So there you go.
I'm always a fan more of the HB or the 2H pencil, but that's just me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Any recommendations on places to stay or places to eat?
Well, we are very fortunate in having a just huge amount of world-class country house hotels here. Are you familiar with the country house hotel concept?
I'm familiar with house and country, and I'm assuming a country house would be a house that I would find in the country. Are we talking about something that is more of a manor?
The idea would be that this would be, yes, largish house, certainly for most of us, but that is very warm and welcoming, but treats you as you would be treated if you had in the olden days, sort of 150 years ago, been invited for a weekend at some sort of rather wealthy landed gentry. But we're not talking big posh places, but they are warm, welcoming, largish houses that would seat probably 12 bedrooms, maybe that. We have some absolutely beautiful places like that, which have superb food. We've got Michelin-starred chefs here. We've got a lot of very good pubs.
And your favorite 2 or 3 of those would be?
Well, I think if I was looking at country house hotels, I have a couple of particular favourites in the South Lakes, which is a good base if you're coming from London, which would be and the Linthwaite House and the Gilpin Lodge are both absolutely lovely places. Small, quite intimate. One's a slightly more contemporary, the other's a bit more traditional. And then restaurant-wise, I mean, I do tend to prefer the places that are perhaps there's a place called the Jumble Room, Chris, in Ambleside, which a jumble sale is a place where you go to sort of sell your bric-a-brac and this sort of thing. It's one up from a garage sale.
Okay.
And the Jumble Room is a sort of jumble of very quirky knickknacks and things. The food is great. It's sort of English food mixed with, as we have mainly, slight international flavour. And there's just so many. I find it difficult really to recommend. I think it's what suits you really, but I'm always happy to recommend.
Okay. Well, let's try this. What was the last meal you really enjoyed in that area and where was it?
Oh, okay. Well, actually, it was a bar meal.
Okay.
In a pub by a lake called Buttermere, which if you're in the north of the Lake District and you go over Honister Pass, which is a fairly high pass, and you go down into this valley, and there are 2 lakes in this valley, and one of them's called Buttermere, which is a very lovely lake. And there's a pub there called The Bridge, and it just does really good burgers and steaks and good, uncomplicated English food. And the atmosphere is quite pubby. So that was my favourite one recently.
Okay. And then since you do run a site called The Quirky Traveler, what's the quirkiest thing you've seen in the Lake District?
Well, the things that people absolutely, they look at and they're just sort of amazed by are our county shows. They are quintessentially English, where they sort of show the best sheep. All the farmers are sort of showing off their beautiful sheep. They've got all the animals. We have a lot of llamas and alpacas here for some reason. They're very popular now. And then there's all the traditional crafts. But the thing, Chris, that I think is definitely quirky and just made me fall about laughing, I'm sorry, Cumbrians, but it did. They have something called Cumberland Wrestling. Have you come across this?
I do not know Cumberland Wrestling.
Okay. Cumberland wrestling is basically when two men sort of grab each other around the body, and just basically it's whoever can force the other one down onto the ground, still sort of holding on, their arms locked around each other. But the quirky bit is that they kind of do this in sort of vest, underpants and leggings. All of the pants are like Bridget Jones knickers, huge things, and they're embroidered. In the olden days, the girlfriends would embroider these pants with intricate flowers and things. And so you get these really big, strong, roughy-tufty guys grappling with each other in this rather bizarre costume. I love it, and it's just so bonkers and so English, and that's one of the very quirky sights. They go on through all the way through the summer season, these shows.
And I assume that comes from the fact if you wear flowered pants like that in England, you better be able to wrestle.
Absolutely. Quite. Yeah. So I think nowadays the youngsters, and also they've started to let women in, which is causing a huge controversy here. But yeah, they managed to carry it off with, it's a bit like the Scots wearing kilts. You know, you just don't argue with the Scots in a skirt. You don't argue with these guys.
And we also talked before about that there are some possibilities for people in terms of who want to get out and hike, to hike from place to place, basically, and have their luggage sent on ahead of them and basically do day hiking without backpacking.
Yeah, I mean, there's a route called the Cumbrian Way, which sort of takes you from the coast across, and travel companies will arrange for you to have your luggage sent on ahead. You can arrange bed and breakfast. I think that's another very great option for people to come and stay in B&Bs. And then there's also 2 or 3 routes that go the sort of north-south length of the county. And again, it's very easy to arrange these because geographically there's never that far a distance between each place. It's just that sometimes you've got to climb up before you can obviously come down again.
Sure. Now, you mentioned that when Beatrix Potter went up to the area that she met someone there. Who's the most memorable person you've met in the area?
Well, I did a series of interviews with local people a couple of years ago, and there was a guy called Sir Chris Bonington who lives in the north of the Lake District in quite an out-of-the-way place. He's a mountaineer, and he's famous for his Everest and Annapurna expeditions, and it was absolutely fascinating to talk to this guy who has been all over the world and climbed, as you know, you can imagine, some of the most inaccessible and inhospitable mountains, and yet chooses to come back here to live because he said this is such an uplifting place. He gets a lot of great practice, and he's in his 70s now, but he still goes and climbs smaller mountains in the Himalayas. And yet he said it's the combination of the beautiful mountains and the people. And he was just a very, very interesting man with lots of stories to tell about local and international climbing.
Now, traditionally, this area was a little more cut off, a little more remote. Is the language a little different? Are there expressions that when you hear, you know you're talking to somebody from the Lake District?
Yes, they have their own dialect. And I must admit, when I first moved, I've lived up sort of in the region for 14, 15 years. And the local farming dialect can be really quite difficult to understand. But it's things like the word for little is lao. And they actually have a different, in farming, when they're counting their sheep, they actually have a completely different numbering system for, I think it's 1 to 10. Don't ask me what it is, Chris, but I worked with a few farmers once, and they'd suddenly go into this sort of language, and it's a fairly strong dialect when you're right in the heart of the country. Now, I don't think anybody have too much of a problem generally understanding, but yes, they have their own dialect, definitely.
Interesting. When I go to the Lake District, where am I going to go that I'm going to feel furthest from home?
I think the place that would really give you that away from it all feeling is Wastwater, which is on the west side of the Lake District. We've got the deepest lake there and the highest mountain. Wastwater's the deepest lake, and Scarfell Pike is our highest mountain. But it's a little bit difficult to get to, Chris, and it's away from towns and the villages. And it has a wild beauty to the area that you probably don't get anywhere else in this country, I'd say. So that's what I'd recommend.
Excellent. If I describe to you I want to put you in the place in the Lake District that you think has the most beautiful picture. Where are you and what are you looking at?
Well, there is a view from a seat at Rydal Water. Rydal Water is a little lake which is very near to the road. It's not miles from civilization or anything. Very easy to get to for anybody, just to be able to just wander up, about a 10-minute walk from the little car park. And the view there, Chris, is just perfect. You've got a small lake in front of you with the fells, the hills, almost encircling it. There's a little white cottage across the lake, which is where Wordsworth and Coleridge used to stop. So it's got that, you've got the hillside with the sheep and just that short walk away from the road, and you really get a lovely feeling of relaxation and typical Lake District. That's where I'd recommend.
Excellent. Are there any other tips that you want to give to people who are heading to the Lake District?
I think, apart from the weather, obviously, be prepared. I would say just get out and about with a decent map. I mean, a map of where the roads and the villages are. We have lots of tiny little country lanes that will take you shortcuts and bring you into a little stone bridge or some little bridleway or stream that's just that wee bit off the beaten track. So just go and explore, because it's a small area, but it's got lots and lots of unique places to find. And I'm still discovering places now. So that would be my advice. You know, get a local map and then set off and do a bit of exploring.
And in terms of places to start, do you have one favorite hike or walk?
Well, again, and I have to say, I'm not someone that especially likes going up. Okay, so I like looking up. And one walk that I do enjoy, because again, as you may have gathered, the South Lakes is an area that I am very familiar with and love. And it is the walk from Grasmere village along what we call the coffin route, which is where they used to bring the coffins from a church which didn't have a graveyard to Grasmere Church, which did. And that walk takes you along two lovely little lakes, Grasmere and Rydal Water, with views of Windermere in the background. And it takes you up a little bit, enough to get a good view, and it brings you down past Dove Cottage and Wordsworth's home at Rydal Mount. And it's only an hour and a half or so, but it will give you a real flavour of the Lake District.
Excellent. As we go to wind this down, last two questions. Finish this sentence for me. You really know you're in the Lake District when what?
When you feel totally relaxed and have completely forgotten the stresses and strains of daily life. Yeah, it's a feeling, Chris, that this place gives you, which people who visit say is like nowhere else in the world.
And if you had to summarize the Lake District in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Well, one has got to be inspiring, which I know is a little bit overused these days, but it is truly inspiring. It's tranquil. I mean, the biggest traffic jam we'd get would be, a few sheep.
Would be a little sheep, yeah.
And I say it's life enhancing, because it's one of those places that just reminds you of what life is really all about.
Excellent. Well, Zoe, thanks so much for your patience, first of all, doing this twice. And if people want to read more about your travel writing, where should they go?
Well, if you visit thequirkytraveller.com, you'll find lots of things there that will hopefully interest you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for coming on the show and coming back on the show.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a real pleasure.
In news of the community, I've had some real interesting comments over on some of the episodes at the Amateur Traveler site. I know many of you don't get over there because I actually get more downloads from the show than I get hits to the website in a given week. But there's a comment, for instance, from Fred Lusk on an older show, which was the travel to the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains, episode 178. And it's basically Fred's travel guide. I won't read the whole thing because he's got about 12 different points of things you ought to see if you go to that area. And then I also got a comment from Andy Dye. Andy Dye was the guest talking about Melbourne. You may recall that Andy caught some grief because he talked about the Phillip Island Penguin Parade, and he did not enjoy it that much. And we've had people who wrote in defending it, but he posted a letter to the editor to the travel section of Melbourne's broadsheet newspaper, The Age, of someone else who had a similar experience. So I hope you get a chance to get to the site, especially before you go someplace we talked about, to see what corrections, what additions people who've listened to the show have made in comments on that episode. And with that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler because I'm about to record 2 new episodes today, so I need to get on with that. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and check out the other comments on this episode at theamateurtraveler.com. You can also send me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, and don't forget you can follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.